Hi, I'm Paul from Test Data Services, and this video summary is going to step through line by line or action by action the process of integrating X-Ray with a load test. So I've got an example here. I've just got a trace, and if we look at the load test that's running, we can see that we're actually getting data in here. This data in here is exactly coming from X-Ray. It's this same data. In fact, it's actually these segments. So if I was to go back and just show you what this is like last minute, so it's refreshing 1 minute, 343 traces, and we can see a distribution of transactions mostly between 6 and 8 seconds, and that's because this is in a region. It's in Northern Virginia, which is quite distant from the DynamoDB database where everything is stored, and there's a few reasons for that. I don't need to go into it now, but it's a great example from a point of view of showing you the integration. So to be able to show you the integration, we need to have some workload. We need to generate some samples, which is what I'm doing, and that's what's happening right here in this test. What the test is doing is basically it's the same test as I did in the email storm. I'll stick a card up in the top right hand corner. We have emails that are starting off with what I'm calling a generation 4 email. When they get received, we then process that, notice that it's a Gen 4 email, and we create a whole lot of generation 3 emails. And we do that by actually sending new emails to any of the 2.5 million people in the data set, the 2.5 million identity data set for Test Data Services. So you can see there we've generated a generation 4 email, we're sending it to 3 different people, and then a few moments later we'll catch that email. So they're real emails, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of these generation 3s. We're now generating up to 7 different emails, or 8, sorry, different emails for each of those, and we'll see all these Gen 2s coming through now. So what this means is every minute or so we're having a wave of heavy email usage, and that wave of email usage is really useful for being able to track our traces. So we'll see the traces coming through in waves like this with a 1 minute period. Okay, so that's the basis for, that's the sort of the environment that we're working in. Now to create the actual integration. So we go to Lambda, we need to create a function. I'm going to do this with the console, and I'm going to use code that you can actually just copy. So demo X-Ray, I'm going to call it demo X-Ray 2 because I've just done demo X-Ray, which is the one you're looking at right now. And we want to use an existing role, and the role is going to be demo Lambda role, create function. And when we create a function in Lambda, we've got the code here and we've got a test. So I'm going to copy the code in first. I've just got it in a notepad here, which I'm going to put that same notepad file in the description below. So that's the function. I'm going to save that. Now to do the test, we're running real activity at the moment. So if I put the right stuff in this test, we'll actually see data come back straight away. And then I'm going to walk through a quick walkthrough of the code itself. Create, got to give it a name. And before we run it, actually, this is looking back 60 seconds. Let's just make it look back 20 seconds for a 1 second period. And let's only look at transactions that take more than a second. We'll save that. But before we run it, it takes a fair bit of CPU. So let's just bump up this to 1000 meg or a gig. And let's bump this one up 10 seconds. We shouldn't need 10 seconds, but hit test, and let's have a look and see how long it took. So it took 578 milliseconds, not too long, and it looked at 40 traces in that 1 second period. Do it again, 20 traces, 8 traces, 3 traces, none. And that's because we've got this wave type behavior going on, which is why I decided to use that as the test basis. We've got 1 trace, it'll start to rise up again soon. 2 traces, I'm looking down here for the trace count. Now, each time we've got a trace, we're going to have some data. It's a transaction list returned in JSON structure with a transaction name to be used as a custom transaction, and then the response time to specify against that transaction. And it's basically going through each of the segments in this case for DynamoDB that relate to those traces that took more than that threshold time of 1 second. If we were to go in and configure it, and instead of saying DynamoDB, there are also S3 segments because we're reading from S3. If we hit test now, then we're just going to get the S3 components, which is great, so that we can actually differentiate between DynamoDB and S3. If you don't care about the DynamoDB and you just care about S3 or SES or whatever, then you can just put those bits in and get a nice clean subset of the things that you're interested in. Or you can put it all in if you want. If we want to look at what that function looks like, I'll just do a very quick walkthrough. So the test here, all of these parameters get passed in as event in Lambda. So when you see event dot lookback seconds, it comes from that structure. And what we're doing is we're doing a get trace summary. So we're passing in X-ray trace summary query. And what that's doing is it's passing in 3 things: an end time, start time, and sampling. I've set sampling to false. And start time is the current time, which is determined by doing math, by doing a today, a date for today, and then doing math and rounding it down to the nearest second. So that's what current time is, and then minus lookback seconds. So we're looking back in history that many seconds, but the end time is the same as the start time plus the window. So that's why we're going to have, say, a 1 second window if we've set the window to 1 second. So we do this call to get trace summaries, and then for each of the summaries that we get, we have a look and we check if the duration is in excess of the trigger threshold duration. If it is, then we go into a loop here, or then we check to see if the entry point is matching, and if it is, then we'll do a call to get batch get traces, and we're going to pass in the ID from the summary. And for all of the traces that come back, which is 1 trace, it will have a lot of segments. For each of the segments, we're going to see if the segment is a segment we're interested in, and if it is, we're going to push this data here into that structure, and then we're going to return that whole structure. So that's what this is: transaction list, and we've got a transaction, a latency, a transaction, a latency, and so on. So that's how that bit works. So now we've created this function and we've verified that it works. What we now need to do is go to API Gateway, and we need to create an API Gateway endpoint. So we're going to say create. We're going to create a REST API. And what I'll just do here though is I will go back and just make sure it's easier if I copy that. I'm going to call the API the same name as the Lambda function just for simplicity. So demo X-Ray 2, create. Now I have to create a method. So we're going to create a method of get. We're just going to do this with a get because then it's easy to use from a browser. And the Lambda function we're calling is demo X-Ray 2. Yes, we're going to give it permission. So we've now got an API gateway entry, and we've got a method request. Now in the method request, we have to specify the query parameters. We've got to get that data into the Lambda function. So we're going to do that. I'm just going to copy from over this side, look back seconds, and yes, and then window seconds. We've got 6 of these to add. And then target name, copy, and then segment name, copy, and then trace trigger duration. So you can do the same. I'll put that same structure, that test structure, and you can just use that, which is what I'm doing right now. The next thing we need to do is we mark all of these as required, because if they're not passed in, it's not going to work. All right, so we've now specified the query parameters. Next thing we need to do is we need to, before we go from query parameters passed in here, we've got to get to this Lambda function, but we need to convert the query parameters into something the Lambda function can receive. So we do that with an integration request. We go to mapping templates and we add a mapping template and we call it application JSON, like that. And then we say tick and we say yes. And now we have to put the mapping template in. I'm going to show you what this is. Copy, paste. So this is the way that you go from the query parameters. So in this case, we've got a structure and it says $input.params, which is the query parameters, look back seconds. So this will convert this whole thing here to the number, which is look back seconds. Whereas this one here, target entry point, it will take that query parameter and it will put it into a string. See the double quote there? Which is important, otherwise it's not going to work. So that's that structure. We're saving that, and now we can go back to the method. Now we want to test it, so we click on test. Now the test we're going to do is we're going to copy this one, paste, test, and look at that, it worked. We've got latency, we've got all our transactions, and if I scroll down, we'll actually see that mapping. Look back seconds 30, window seconds 10, entry point, segment name, and we can see we've got no quotes around the numbers, but we do have quotes around the text, which is what we're supposed to get. So we can see there how it works. So if it didn't work for you, scroll down and look for this mapping and make sure that your mapping is correct, because that's usually going to be a problem if you haven't done that mapping right. And if we were to change any of these values just for fun, instead of having a 10 seconds, and instead of looking back 30, let's just look back 20 and hit test, and there we go. And we can just do this as often as we like. It'll generally come back in well under a second, which is what we want to see. Okay, now we need to deploy it so that we can actually run it from anywhere we want. Deploy API, new stage, demo, and it's now deployed. So this endpoint now lets us access it. So if I copy this link address and if I paste it here, put a question mark to indicate I'm about to do query parameters, and take those same query parameters I had before and paste them in, we've now exposed all those transactions each time we run it, and there we go. It depending on how much workload the system is processing, we get more or less. We could now change this to say 1 second, and it'll be much smaller. Well, normally it would be much smaller. And then if we were to change it so that instead of being DynamoDB, we could change this to S3. And then we just get the S3 ones. So how's that? Nice. So now we've got the Lambda function, we've got API gateway, we have deployed it to an API endpoint. Next thing we want to do is actually import it into our actual test script, which we're building into the scenario to create these transactions. So what we need to do here is actually, go back and get this HTTPS all the way up to the question mark, copy, and in our script all the way up to the question mark, paste. So you can see it just changed, and so it was PXML, now it's 05PJ, so it's definitely the new one. If I now hit play, it will save and it will run, and look, it's generated a bucket load of transactions, which is great. So that's all wonderful. So now if I exit out of that and go back to the load test, stop this load test from running, stop now, and refresh so that we get the newest version, the one we've just been running. Refresh script, okay, and push play. Then we will have our instrumented X-ray data coming through into this scenario, which is great. So I hope that you can follow along with this, and there you go. It's come through, which is good. It takes a while for it to show up, but there they are. That's all the trace segments for DynamoDB, and the S3 one will be there as well. So hope you found this useful, and hope you give it a go, and you might want to integrate X-Ray into more than just LoadRunner. You can integrate it into anything you like. Have a great day. All the best.